For today's Mental Health Minute, I wanted to talk a little bit about what to expect when you go to see a psychiatrist for the very first time. In a previous Mental Health Minute, I discussed the difference between a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a therapist or a counselor. So if you missed that, take a look at that. But to summarize, a psychiatrist goes to medical school. So they have the same degree and qualifications as your primary care physician, but they do a special training called a residency in mental health. They may work in inpatient psychiatric clinics or in outpatient settings. Outpatient being, of course, you go to see them in an office, you go home at the end of the day. Now, the first time that you ever see a psychiatrist, they're going to ask you a lot of questions, and it may seem like they're reading from a script because often they really are reading from a script. They may be using what's called a schedule interview for diagnostic disorders. This asks very specific questions about signs or symptoms you may be having or experiencing that have to do with very specific mental illness concerns, such as major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and other specific concerns that you might be having. Based on those responses, they're going to make recommendations to you. They may recommend that you go for further testing with a psychologist. They may recommend medications. They may recommend therapy. Or if you're in crisis or might be a danger to yourself or someone else, then they may recommend inpatient treatment. The very first meeting with a psychiatrist, they might be behind a computer a lot of the time, or they might be writing on a notepad for a lot of the time. This doesn't mean that they're not listening to you, but this first interview is very structured and very specific so they can find exactly what they're treating. So they can figure out what's accurate and what's going to be best for you. Now, that said, a psychiatrist should still listen to you. This is extremely important. If you don't feel you're being listened to about what you're experiencing, about what your troubles are, about what your signs and symptoms are, that may be a sign to find a new psychiatrist. It's also a great idea to bring somebody you trust with you to your very first appointment. This could be a family member or a friend, someone who can advocate for you, because we all know being at the very first appointment with a new doctor can be really nerve-wracking, especially if you're talking about personal things like your emotional health and traumatic experiences and things like this. So it can really help to have someone you trust to have your back and maybe remind you of things that you've told them before that maybe you're forgetting when the psychiatrist asks you about them. One mistake a lot of people make is they think that when they see a psychiatrist for the first time, that's the person that's going to do talk therapy with them, that's the person that's going to have you talk for an hour about what's going on with you and address possible ways to cope with it. Most psychiatrists who prescribe medication don't do talk therapy as well. Every now and then, you might find a very rare unicorn psychiatrist who does both medication and talk therapy, but this has become the exception rather than the rule. This used to be extremely common. In fact, it used to be the norm, but it no longer is, at least in the United States of America. Most likely, for counseling, for someone that you talk about your problems and concerns with, they're going to recommend a psychologist or a therapist to you. Thanks so much.